Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. At The Reason We Learn, we aspire to be part of the solution. The purpose of this show is to take a good, honest, potentially painful look at the way kids are being educated. We know we can do better, and this is where we'll talk about how. Let's learn something. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. Today's show is going to be a little different than my usual in terms of format. You will not see me or my guest, Christine Jones, on video. You will see a presentation put together by Christine, and you will hear our voices responding to it, working through it, explaining it, etc. It is more like eavesdropping on a conversation about a topic presented visually with words. It's fascinating. I was fascinated by her findings. I knew some of the information. I did not know other parts of the information. But as disturbing as some of it is truly fascinating. I hope you will find it informative and helpful as you strive to understand the push to, in my words, not hers, pathologize childhood and focus almost exclusively on mental health rather than academics. A little bit about my guest, Christine Jones, a.k.a. the Palmer Worm on Twitter and Substack, has 25 years experience in education. She's originally from the UK. She now lives in Canada. Like me, she came to the research end of education because she observed things that troubled her and wanted to know more about how we got here. How did this happen? Where did these pedagogies come from? Where do these ideas come from and why? And why are they so prevalent? And how is it that they're becoming so prevalent when they don't seem to be backed up by real evidence of efficacy or even legitimacy? How is it they're spreading so quickly? Why are people embracing them so readily, et cetera? So we're two of a kind in a way. She just has looked at different material and is bringing a fresh pair of eyes to it, a wonderful perspective. And I'm just so grateful that she's joining me for the show. This is part one of two. We will spend about 2 hours going through the first part of her presentation, and then part two will come back with the remainder. And I hope you will, I hesitate to say enjoy, but I hope you will appreciate the amount of work that she put into this, as well as the analysis that we bring to bear. So thank you for watching and listening, and I hope you will consider subscribing to the channel to be notified when I make part two and when I make other videos. And please give us a like if you appreciate the content, comment if you have questions, and share this with people who need to learn more about this important topic. Thanks for watching. Hi, Christine.
Hi, Deb. Hello, Deb. Hi, great to be with you. Thank you for having me. I'm going to let a mental health specialist explain what mental healthism really is, because I think it gives a very good intro to the fact that it's not a discrete subject. It's something that has bled out like a dying animal. It's completely bled out into curriculum, pedagogy, educational philosophy, governance, society, social health, everything. And it's been a very pernicious delivery mechanism of a certain kind of mental virus, in my opinion. But I don't think I'm the only one that thinks that way. Anyway, if we go to our next slide, then we'll see what Dr. Bruce Scott has to say about mental healthism. It's his term. And I will say that Dr. Bruce Scott restored my faith in psychologists, because I was pretty down on them when I saw all of the psychology-based stuff really coming strongly into the schools. I know it's been with us a long time, but it really ramping up. And so many people eating it up. Teachers, parents, less so parents because they were less aware of actually what and how it was coming through, but teachers just eating it up in professional development sessions. And, it really dismayed me. So mental healthism, I will just read what Dr. Bruce Scott says. Today, political activists from all political persuasions often campaign for more or improved mental health services. It's simply seen as a good thing. There's almost no interrogation of the concept of mental health from a critical psychoanalytical or philosophical perspective, or even rarer, a spiritual perspective. The uncritical acceptance of the idea of mental health has damaging consequences. The mental health agenda forces people to think of the problems they experience as purely psychological problems, a psychopathologization of ordinary life. This is compounded and perpetuated by the discipline of psychology itself, which purports to be a neutral science. And we're going to see through this how that is not true. By reducing human beings to machines in this way, so that discontent, estrangement, and so on are seen as forms of mental ill health, the institutions of psychology shore up the status quo. They present the acceptance of the status quo as good mental health. The psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan was very cognizant of the fact that the modern demand for happiness, and I remember the happiness industry coming on the scene in the 90s, so happiness and the existence of happiness / mental health industry, it implies the ultimately unsatisfying nature of customer satisfaction. So schools are being turned into mental health centers. And these curricular developments are wholly inappropriate. The school is not the place where you meddle with the mental health of a child or extract information from them on issues pertaining to mental health and well-being. And we're going to cover a lot of that as well.
Right. Well,
so
this rings so true for me that, I mean, as someone who's not an expert in this, I've wondered at times, as I'm sure many parents out there watching or listening have wondered, is it us? Are we just wrong? Are we just ignorant? Is it, because many of us have a gut reaction initially to this. So we can't put into words necessarily why we think it's wrong. I can now, but when I began, it was just a feeling that this was not right. This was not the right thing to do. And to read this or, hear it really helps concretize the ideas that I think have been banging around in a lot of people's minds.
Yes, and hopefully as we go through it will do so even more. Now, the mental healthism is really just a piece of the bigger picture. And we'll see as well later through the presentation how it opens out like a Google Earth zoom up. And we'll see that mental healthism is, one location, but we're going to go out and broader from that and see what it's relating to and really where the roots of it are. But I came across a woman's work today, Kaylin Ford. I don't know if your audience knows of her. I can't believe I only discovered her today. Kaylin Ford is a documentary filmmaker, foreign policy specialist, and founder of the Alberta Classical Academy Charter Schools. Since I discovered her, I've just been eating up her written work and looking at her schools and what she's been doing. But she is very rare in that she really goes down to the roots as well. She doesn't just stay around the political and the social and the very loud symptoms that we see all over social media. She has a phenomenal understanding of the underlying philosophy and metaphysics that really driving all of this. And I'd just like to read her words because it helps to set the scene a little bit, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So she says, every education is underpinned by a set of highly consequential, metaphysical, and anthropological ideas about the nature of reality and man's place in it. Now, this is really what we're talking about. The nature of reality and man's place in it. One version of the nature of reality, a pseudo-reality, has us as global citizens accepting the divine state, granting and withdrawing privileges. Okay? That's one idea of ourselves and the world around us. Alternatively, we have the traditional ontology that most of us, certainly of our age, 40s, 50s, and even a little bit younger maybe, have grown up with, and that that our inalienable rights are given to us by our Creator, and that man, so therefore the state, cannot take them away. They are our divine rights. And in order for that to be the case, then we have a certain understanding of ourselves in relation to all else around us. So they're two very different understandings of both inwards and outwards. And our education system has moved us from one to the other, but it's done it under the bonnet or under the hood or behind the veneer, because it has seemed, certainly for to leave the traditional veneer in place. But with increasing crisis in education, the veneer has slipped. And I think 2020 really ripped it all off, so that we can now see where education has been taking us for a century. They're not hiding it anymore. But just to finish up with Kaylin's words. So, hang on. So she says, man's place in it. It's at this level that modern education went awry. And if we want to return it to its proper ends, we have to begin with first principles. And I love the way she speaks, because, you know, she's not saying we must become a theocracy.
Right.
She's not saying we must have Christian nationalism. Far from it, you know. She's saying we must return to proper ends and begin with first principles. So here they are. That reality objectively exists, and it is good. That there is an underlying order to it. That its laws and qualities are at least partly apprehensible through human reason. That as part of creation, we are subject to its laws. That reality contains an intangible moral dimension, and that we should endeavor to understand it and attune our souls to it. Reality, in other words, is not free of bias, and it dictates that there are better and worse ways of living. Truth is better than falsehood, justice better than injustice, virtue better than vice, beauty better than ugliness. Education was not about teaching us to ignore these differences, but to discern them correctly so that we might live virtuously in conformity to nature.
I love that so much. It reminds me, though, a little bit of Ayn Rand.
Yes, it does, doesn't it?
It really does. There are many ideas that she just expressed that are echoed in Rand's explanation of what education is. And in fact, the name of this channel, most people probably don't know, but the name of this channel is a play on words that was drawn from that definition. I called it The Reason We Learn.
Yes.
Because I wanted to cover why we bother to have an education at all. Like, why do we educate ourselves and our children? And I also wanted to emphasize that we have to learn to use reason. It's not automatic. We all are born with the capacity to learn to use it. But without that education and that discipline, that is the goal, that's the project that we're working on to make sense of the world. And as you mentioned, you know, live in that proper harmony with reality and nature, we won't. You can live your whole life not using your capacity for reason. And we see a lot of people doing that.
Yeah, and we'll also touch on why it's very profitable for vested interests to have us in that pseudo-reality.
Exactly.
Okay, so on the next slide, I've put a little bit more about Dr. Bruce Scott in case people don't know about his work. He writes a lot for the UK column, ukcolumn.org. I've followed them since the beginning of 2020. They're a fantastic resource for all sorts of information. But I've put up Dr. Scott's Twitter reference, and he's written a fiction book, but you can see what the fiction is based on if you have a little read of the Gulag Caledonia, if people could do that at their own leisure. But he certainly understands the situation that we're in. And the article of his that I first read that made me think, oh, hallelujah, there's a psychologist that's not gone mad, that really understands what's going on, is the one from UK column, which is We're All Pavlov's Dogs Now. It's absolutely brilliant.
Oh, I have not heard that. I'm going to have to read that. But it just to read from this description, because it's quite tiny. It's Gulag Caledonia, a story of a dystopian future Scotland set in 2050, ravaged by globalism, gender politics, Cultural Marxism, Biosecurity Surveillance, and Eco-Totalitarianism. This is the story of David, separated from his wife and children by the state. His father, missing, taken by the state years earlier, leaves a huge void in his life. David has been fired from his post as a postdoctorate researcher at St. Andrews University for the hate crime of voicing supposedly misogynistic views via his research findings. The story finds him on digital universal basic income, living in a soulless lower block in the suburbs of Glasgow, where no real community exists. The Scotland of 2050 is essentially an open prison where people are controlled, barred from the countryside, and who have little hope of escape from the totalitarian system. David is summoned to the State Department of Work and Well-being. He's assigned to a compulsory 6-month work and well-being placement at the protein factories on the remote Outer Hebrides of Scotland. What follows is a descent into reminiscence of his long-lost father, his childhood, and philosophical and religious reflections, which act as a critique of the time. And this is set in 2050, but one of the things that shocked me so much was how Scotland responded to the virus and the policies.
Yes.
I've not been to Scotland. I've been to the UK, but it was always my impression as a, ignorant American, I suppose, that the Scottish people were so, feisty and independent and strong-willed. And I think of the Scotch Irish and the Scots who came to the United States. And in fact, it was right here in North Carolina where I live that, there were large groups of Scottish immigrants who supposedly authored, there was a small group of them amongst a large group, who supposedly authored the actual first Declaration of Independence right here in Mecklenburg County. We just only heard about the second one. So I was shocked. What happened to the Scots, I thought? Or did they all leave and go to the New World? I don't know. But I wondered, what happened? It seemed, but like I said, I haven't been there, so maybe that was my romanticized view of them, but I was surprised.
Well, I think, like everywhere, really, it's been the rise and the full taking over of the administrative state, the administrative bureaucracy, that and the fear of being out of a job and cancelled and everything. But this huge layer of managerial and administrative bureaucracy that's in all of the professions and
Right.
the civil service and everything. It's in education I see it. I see that where teachers were once empowered by their administrator, their head teacher, their superiors, they were empowered to be the great teachers that they were. Well, not at all now. It's all the administration and that level has the power, and the teachers are muted, basically. Muted, hands tied behind their back. I mean, I've swung between being incredibly frustrated and angry at what teachers are doing, and then remembering not all teachers, and then I have to go, yeah, but you've seen it. You've seen how that blob of a system, and in that administrative managerial layer, those people at that layer have not 1 ounce of the knowledge, skill, expertise, nous, humanity, it seems, of the actual teacher at the coalface,
Right.
So I think it's this kind of just this takeover of the blob, which has rendered, real skillful, useful people of integrity mute.
Yes.
And you can see I put lovely Nicola Sturgeon there on the screen as well. The poison dwarf. Sorry, am I allowed to say the poison dwarf?
Absolutely. But
Yeah.
you might want to explain to the audience who she is for those who don't follow all this as closely.
First Minister of Scotland, yes.
Okay.
She also looks remarkably like a comedian from the 1970s, Jimmy Cranky, but we won't go there. But Bruce has written fantastic articles for UK column, and they're well worth going to look at, as well as follow him on Twitter, I would say. And I've just put Stephanie Wynn at the bottom there because she's another
We love her.
psychologist,
Yes.
psychotherapist, and I thought, well, I've got to give her a shout out. She has been going great guns on those memes recently, hasn't she?
Mm-hmm. She really has. They're brilliant.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant.
And I was saying it's my ignorance that I don't know of more. I'm sure there are many more, but this is a great opportunity for ones who, like Bruce and like Stephanie, that counter the narrative. Come on out. come on out, speak up, because there is community developing that wants to hear from you and supports that counter to the narrative.
Yes, very much so. I'm so thrilled to see her work getting noticed more. She's been on my channel. I went and did a podcast with her, and I have so much respect for her and really love her work.
Yes.
So
So
shall
moving
we
on. Yep.
move on? Yes. And here we go. All right.
Okay, well, when I really started the deep dives on the mental health side of things because I was convinced myself, and you'll see it, if anyone who's read my Substack will see that I've been banging on for ages about how self-expression as a learning objective, self-expression as the purpose of curriculum, to my mind, had been a real mechanism of destruction.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I could go on about, well, when I was at school, it wasn't like that. Well, it was actually starting a little bit. So I'm 50, and so in the 80s, and I went to a comprehensive school, which was an amalgam of an old grammar and a secondary modern, shoved them together. And on the staff, there were still lots of teachers that wore their academic gowns, threw chalk. Still very much the old guard, but there were some new ones creeping in. And so I remember when English, when I was about 13, 14, English lessons switched from being very cognitive based. And there was a new teacher, a new young woman with lots of jewelry and a biker jacket and kind of backcombed hair. And people were very rare dressing like that in the school. And instead of getting us to work on grammar and, you know, that kind of formal English, she had us read something that was really weird for all of us. She had us read something called The Turbulent Term of Tyler, and we were to draw pictures on how we thought that the characters felt.
What?
We'd never done anything like that before. You know, we were doing, you know, very reasonable, sophisticated English up to that point.
Right.
And I know my mum and several others wrote in to the head of English and said, what's going on, you know? It's ridiculous. And he couldn't stop it. And of course, at the time, I didn't really pay that much attention to it. You know, you just get on, you just, as a kid in school, bless them, you just accept what's done to you and you don't really think too much. It was
Right.
boring to be coloring in pictures in an English lesson, really boring. But years later, I look back at that and I think, I can see that the head of department was told he had to have, you know, this coming in. And I was the second year of GCSE. So when they switched from GCE O levels to GCSE, functional literacy in a number of domains was de-emphasized and even removed. Like in my field in music, you could then get an A star GCSE music without being able to read music at all. Now I'm not dissing on people who have are really accomplished players, singers, whatever, and they haven't come to music performing through conventional reading music. You know, you get people who improvise and people who can sit down and hear things and just play it. Fantastic skill. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about kids who were put in alongside other kids who were fluent with reading music. So you get a situation in a class where the teacher has to get them all up to scratch to be able to demonstrate that they've hit the attainment goals. And so the kids that were fluent in music, like me, we had no instruction during the whole of our GCSE. We were just left in a room to get on with it, which we did because we had private music lessons as well. But the kids who were taken on to do GCSE, who had none of that, what I call musical spelling and grammar, couldn't do the tasks that were required of them. They had to basically be babysat and the teacher to kind of half doing it for them in order to meet the goals. And yet it said that, you know, reading musical notation wasn't necessary. Well, yes, it was, because you don't just acquire the ability to hear fluently. You don't just acquire the ability to be able to write down when you're listening in an exam, be able to notate and write down what you can hear, and all those things were still being required of students. So yeah, functional literacy, the basic foundational skills were being removed. And so all of that is by way of saying that for me, affective learning has been the real key to understanding where this rot came in.
Yes.
And so I'll read. So if people don't know what affective learning is, so an educational heresy, you can see that the Honorable Samuel, is it Hiawatha? I don't really know how you say that, but here's someone from a former United States senator knew way back when that the educational heresy had flourished, the one that rejects the idea of education as the acquisition of knowledge and skills. And it speaks of the fundamental task in education as therapy. Well, C.S. Lewis said that this was coming.
Yep.
And he was right. And so then I thought, well, who is this guy? Hang on, United States Senator, when did he say this? So 1978. Heck.
Yep.
So all the social and emotional learning, all the stuff that's coming into schools, parents have railed against this before. Well, yes, they have. And they did it before 1978 as well. But if anyone isn't aware of it, then there were a series of hearings. Do you know about this, Deb? The hearings.
I remember there were, yes. I don't know the details of them, but I know that this was brought up before, and I know there were even there was an entire investigation conducted about foundations, private foundations that were funding some of this heresy.
Well, if you go to the next slide, actually, there's a little bit more information there.
Okay, let me get to that. Sorry, is that where we are?
Okay, yeah. Okay. So here we go. A real-life drama took place in 7 American cities in March 1984. Hundreds of parents traveled to one of 7 locations to testify at the U.S. Department of Education hearings on proposed regulations for the protection of pupil rights amendment. Mm-hmm. So you've got 1,300 pages of testimony were recorded with parents and public school teachers, and interested citizens gave their eyewitness accounts of the psychological abuse of children in public schools. Mm-hmm. And they spoke of how classroom courses have confused children about life. Hello. About standards of behavior, about mm-hmm. moral choices, mm-hmm. about religious loyalties. Now, if we can conceive of the fact that, yes, when I say religious loyalties, you might think Christianity, Judaism, Islam. I'd like to say social justice.
Correct.
Social justice is a religious duty. Okay? Mm-hmm. And we'll cover that a bit more later. So about religious loyalties, there's only one religious loyalty currently allowed, right? And about relationships with parents and with peers, bingo. Yep. So there's no good way to summarize the anger and disappointment expressed by these grieving parents about what is going on inside public schools today. Well, this was back in March 1984, but it's equally happening today.
Right. I was a freshman in college. I graduated the year before. Yeah.
Okay. So it has the authentic expressions of parental love overlaid with the indignation at what at that time was being done in the name of education. And that is exactly what is happening now. Right. But then you look at this was called, I think, the Hatch Amendment, the Protection of Pupil Rights Code.
Right. PURPA. Mm-hmm.
And you just look down it and you think, well, it's being violated. So,
well, it has no teeth. This is what I've been trying to explain to parents for quite a while now, is that, first of all, most parents didn't know this existed, which is tragic in and of itself. Because when you have something that can only be enforced by parents and they don't even know it's there, it has, it's now toothless. So it's not even just that the teeth are in their mouth. They don't have them. So you have to first, file, as a parent, you have to file a complaint, and then you have to wait and see if they follow up on it. And then you have to have evidence and so on. They put all of the onus on enforcing this supposed Protection Act on individual parents who, of course, as you've pointed out already, are being gradually kept in the dark about what's going on. Because the
Yeah.
thing about affective education, as opposed to the cognitive kind, is you don't need a lot of materials. If all you're going to do is draw color pictures, you're not sending home as many books. You're not sending home written assignments. So the parents don't really know what's going on unless the kids come home and tell them. So it was a two-pronged approach
Hmm.
to preventing this from having any kind of impact whatsoever.
You're absolutely right about it not producing materials. I remember the one other weird thing when I was at school. The geography teacher, who was great and fully animated to teaching geography, was very grumpy teaching another class that obviously been dumped onto his timetable loading, and it was called global citizenship.
Oh, goodness.
None of us knew what that was about, and he didn't either, but he was very frustrated and he didn't hide it. Ah, this rubbish. And he used to have to give out handouts, and he used to have to collect everything back in at the end. We were
Yes,
allowed to take nothing home,
correct.
uh, and it was just a waste of time. As far as
That's
we
right.
concerned, it was just a DOS lesson. But he was visibly very different from when we knew him in teaching geography.
Right.
He made no, he didn't try and hide it, but he thought it was awful.
Well, I had a
Anyway,
window into a lot of this because I've been a tutor much longer than I was ever a teacher. I
right.
was so frustrated teaching in the schools, I left and went into the private sector and did a bunch of things, but I always tutored. And even when I was a stay at home mom for 10 years and left the workforce, I continued to tutor. So it's very strange when the parent sees the child is not doing well in school, or the child is frustrated, the child is bored, things are not going well, they hire a tutor. Then the tutor gets to see the work,
Hmm,
right?
yeah, yeah,
So the kid has to show me what the homework was or what the assignment in class was, because it's my job to see. And in many cases I had to ask, or I had to communicate with the teacher saying, I'm helping the student. I need a way to see what you're assigning. And they didn't want to give it to me, which was the first, red flag. But then I would go in and see things, and I would be telling the parents, have you seen this, that, the other, asking them, and they were shocked. They had no idea. And this isn't, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. We're talking 10 years ago,
yeah,
longer even. Do you know what they're reading? Do you know what the assignments are? Well, I just assume it's English. Or I just assume it's social studies. Well, do you know what
yeah,
that even is? And
yeah,
so showing them the work, or that the work would, the teacher would put something on the board and then leave the kids to work on a device while the teacher played on their phone or did whatever. And the parents were just horrified. And then they started asking me, what should I do? And what can you say?
mm, yeah. So much debriefing needed with the children.
Yeah,
So much,
exactly.
and so much filling in and compensating for what they're not getting in school, making sure that they're having it in home, and that's not easy either, especially
Exactly.
when their worldviews start to misalign.
Right. You
That's
don't know,
very,
mom. You're not the
yeah,
expert. The
yeah,
teacher knows what they're doing. Did you go to school for this? Do you have a teaching degree?
yeah,
I mean, they even teach them what to say. They will
yeah.
tell
It's
the
it's
students.
that's right. It's not like it was in your day. I mean, we've
Exactly.
had all of this too. We've with our, with our elder one especially. But and I'm just thinking about what you were saying about how difficult it is for the parents to actually do what's necessary to enact their own rights. I'm thinking of watching the mums and the dads at the school board hearings, school board meetings rather, and I'm remembering one lady. She was just treated appallingly. The staff in the schools knew how to give her the right runaround with the information requests and the emails and intimidation, and I don't know. They're coached very well on how to hide, how to lie, all this stuff. It's horrendous for parents trying to get through that now. And the tenacity I've seen of some of the men and women who've actually got through that, I'm full of admiration because it's
Right.
so hard.
It is so
Anyway,
hard,
so
and it is very brave of them to stand
yeah,
up.
yeah. Okay, we'll move on. So, as you say, parents thought that their children were being taught basic knowledge and skills. Parents were indignant the way that educated change agents, and they're every bit, they've remained as change agents, were spending federal tax dollars, their dollars, and using children as guinea pigs for fads and experiments. that have been substituted for real learning. Well, of course, when we go back, as we will, we'll look at the inception of modern education and how that came through social science. We'll see that this is a feature, not a bug. This is exactly what the architects of education fully intended. They fully intended educators to be change agents, and that children would be guinea pigs for fads and experiments, because they're all about transformation and withdrawing the real learning, nullifying it is the best way to describe it. And if the audience haven't been to the New Discourses bullet on nullification, they need to. It's fantastic.
Right. And it's so hard, Christine, it's so hard for people to believe because it sounds so evil. I mean, it just, even, hearing you describe that, and I've, read things that James has written, I've heard what he said. I've read all the materials too. And even though I know they're doing it, I see the reality. It's almost like painful in my brain, to sort of accept this level of, I don't know what you want to call it, but it feels like evil. Who would want
Yeah.
to do this to children? And I think that's where parents get really stuck. Nobody
Yeah.
wants to believe that the people they're leaving their children with every day are actively trying to undermine the parents, the love of the parents, their child's ability to learn to read, their child's ability to function as an independent person without dependency on other people or the government or whatever, because they can't read, they can't do math. It's inconceivable for most people to comprehend that somebody would see a child as a tool or a vehicle of, as you pointed out, transformation.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
very hard to accept.
yeah. Well, I think this is why it was so important through the teacher training programs to utterly convince the teachers, who by and large usually go into teaching because they have the best intentions to help
Sure.
kids, right?
Sure.
To convince them, utterly convince them beyond any doubt, that the ed philosophy and the theories and the methodologies that they were being trained in were absolutely for the child's best interests. And in order to do that, they had to vilify the traditional methods of teaching and learning. They had to build this picture of them being a bogeyman and being harmful and all that kind of thing. Exactly as they're building the picture of the nuclear family and the biological male, female, etc., as being harmful now. And we look at that now and we say, well, that's ridiculous. But
Exactly.
we don't stop and look back to the 1950s and 60s, when all this anti-authoritarian rhetoric was everywhere, and saying, and the drills are bad, grammar and spelling is bad, all these foundational necessary cognitive building blocks, they're all bad, and they're all harming children, and the children will have a trauma. And yet generations of teachers have come through that and gone, yeah, we don't want the children to be harmed. So it's all happening again. It's all the same dynamic at play again.
Right.
The way they do this is that the very deceptive use of language as well. And just on the bottom there, the promoters of this strange therapy education speak in a jargon designed to prevent parents from understanding either the purpose or the methodology. It's a sort of
Oops, sorry.
Aesopian,
My bad.
it's a sort of Aesopian or fable language, which means one thing to the therapy professionals. Okay, and I don't mean the teachers, I mean the actual education theorists who know bloody damn well what they're doing. It means one thing to them, and it means another to the teachers who are undergoing it, and to the parents then who don't suspect or understand what's happening. And I put J up there, they share your language but not your dictionary. But that whole duplicity of language with concealed meanings, that's been a feature right across the board of
That's right.
the theology of Marxism, and the Marxism infiltrating every
Right.
sector, right? Yeah, okay, we'll go on.
And I believe they're now actually teaching neurolinguistic programming with glee. They're not
Yeah.
even hiding it anymore.
No, it's very much yes, we are, and here's why it's a good thing. And years ago, I by accident, I ended up for 3 years delivering a certificate of training practice for the Chartered Institute of Development, CIPD. Um, because I had delivered teacher training courses, they were looking to expand their team. They invited me. They said, "You're used to training. This is a program. Here it is. The program's all done. Will you deliver it?" So, okay. And it was full of HR stuff. So it was train the trainer kind of things. And it was all about Bloom taxonomy and group dynamics and manipulating a discussion. So I remember, if you want to shut up that awkward person like me that always thinks of the negatives of everything, or that you're going to have a problem with that. You're going to, then you give them the
My
black
soul
hat to
sister.
wear.
The same way.
Oh, I always see the negative. I always see not the negative, but I always see the thorn in the side. I'm a pain in the ass.
Well,
So,
no, we need people like that. It's risk mitigation. You need people like that.
yeah, but I remember there were these contrived things, Edward de Bono, six thinking hats, and they're just contriving it so you didn't let that person speak or whatever. And NLP was a huge part of it.
Yeah.
Lots and lots of, I mean, it was just eye-opening and mind-blowing to see this stuff. And this was all being eaten up by people who, it was packaged really nicely, and it
Right.
sounded kind of cutesy, but there was absolutely no substance. In fact, they were just lies. It was just pseudoscience deception. But it was, cute little sound bites, and everyone sounded very important when they could go and repeat it back in the workplace. Bullshit baffles brains kind of thing. And the courses sold like hotcakes, and the company running it made an absolute ton of money. And then it was required, so people who wanted to be promoted within their organizations had to have the ticket. And after 3 years, I couldn't stomach it. It was awful. Just I couldn't deliver that at all. And we were told, the team, we were told, you have to be not a sage on the stage, but a guide on the side. You're a facilitator. You don't have the answers. You have no answers, but you have to ask the questions. And it was dreadful, dreadful.
It's
Anyway,
just
so
so destabilizing for the child. And I think
yeah,
a lot of people, what they do so well is they say things that sound right to the ears of an adult. In other words, if you were an adult going to a class, you wouldn't necessarily want to be lectured at or told a bunch of things. That might be how, you would prefer to learn. Who knows?
yeah.
But children are different. They're not miniature adults. And they actually do look to us, even if they won't necessarily admit it or aren't even aware of it. They look to us for guidance. They want to know. They don't want to have to fill in the blanks for themselves. And in fact, in many cases, it makes them sort of mistrust or distrust the adults who care for them. Like, what do you mean you're asking me? They wouldn't articulate it that way, but there's this sense that, well, if we're equals, why do you get to tell me when I can go to the bathroom? If you're asking me what I think or what I feel or whatever, well, I don't really want to be here at all. And so if you have a child who maybe has trouble at home, or they're lacking in other kinds of discipline, and maybe school would have been the only place they would get that kind of structure and discipline, it's chaos. And
It
the
is.
only children who can flourish, and I wouldn't even say flourish, the only children who can function in an environment where it's, student led everything and group everything, are those students who have such rigidly structured home lives with like wonderful 2-parent families that, like everything is father knows best level perfect, which is super rare anymore, that they come to school and they do it themselves. And then it's a case of parentifying the student in the class over everyone else. So
Yeah.
that's abusive too. They basically reproduce every dysfunctional thing you could ever, come up with in one room.
Yeah, the architects of it, the designers of it knew that this would be the fallout. They
Yep.
knew. They knew it would be breakdown. They knew it would be mental breakdown and social chaos. And that's what they were going for. So child abuse in the classroom is the where I got that information from, if people want to look it up.
Mhm.
Okay, so we'll move on for now. I was very glad to come across the writing of B.K. Eekman. Do you know of her?
I do not.
Okay. So, she was initially teaching, but she didn't spend too long in it because she was so horrified. She spent a few years in it. I can't remember exactly how many, but she came out ultimately because she felt, as a teacher, she could not teach. And I'm going to read some of her pages from Walking Targets: How Our Psychologized Classrooms Are Producing a Nation of Sitting Ducks. And this is a collection of columns and pieces, I think, that she wrote for other sources, but they're all together in one place. Walking Targets. And she's talking about, at the beginning, the cloning of the American mind, which is something else that she wrote. So when she wrote it, it explains three facets of a complicated puzzle: computerization, psychological profiling, non-cognitive teaching methodologies. And this is really what made me go, oh, I want to know more about this woman. Non-cognitive teaching methodologies. Hello. And how they became institutionalized in the nation's schools through lobbying and legislative processes. Now, you and Lisa Logan and Kelly, you have a whole community of people, including yourself, who are so knowledgeable on boots on the ground on the American scene. I'm not that. I didn't grow up there. And I don't have that kind of degree of knowledge of what's on the ground. But I know in broad strokes, from having seen your work and others, the incredible leaps forward to do with psychological profiling and computerization, the data capture, and what's going to be happening with the data. So feel free to jump right on in, and I won't be treading on Lisa's toes or anyone else's, because people need to listen to them for really the detailed information in those fields.
I would agree. Lisa is the go-to person on the data mining and the problem with that. And then I've spoken, as you know, on the other aspects of SEL and the use of language specifically. That's sort of my focus, is the deceptive way they use language and tricks of language to manipulate parents, to manipulate children. You could, if you go and read the Milgram studies, you'll quickly recognize how they do it. Although they translate that to a non-clinical setting, they do it masterfully, and most people are fooled, or they get caught up in the vocabulary and they miss the meaning. Is this SEL? They'll ask me. And I want to say, it doesn't matter what they've called it. Look at what they're doing. Right. So
yeah, that's right. That's right.
Right. So
because
I keep
they
trying.
will, as when they notice you're looking at it and going through it and really seeing what it is for what it is, they'll change its name, right?
That's correct.
They'll call it something else.
That's correct. As they've done, as you've just shown us. You've shown us going back. First, we go all the way back to the 50s and with the senator. And then we come forward to the 1980s. And these things, they were talking about affective education. Well, a non-cognitive or cognitive education. Now they've gone all the way to the lengths of saying, social justice or anti-racist education. And the cognitive kind is straight up white supremacy. I mean, they've gone all the way to completely demonizing what has been effective in the world for thousands of years, which was knowledge-based, cognitive-based education. And they're now saying that if you are interested in classical, traditional methods, cognitive education, you are a racist. You are a white supremacist. Only people of the most evil sort would support that. That's how far we've come since then.
Indeed. And it started off in the 50s and 60s by being called authoritarian.
Correct.
And now it's the actual authoritarians who are calling it whiteness or whatever, supremacist or whatever label they want to throw at it.
Well, of course, because as you mentioned earlier on, you said there's only one worldview permitted. There's only one religion permitted, and there's only one sort of worldview, and they're one and the same, and that's the social justice.
That's right.
And it is a purity test. That
yes,
you
and
will
yes, sorry.
Well, no, you'll be struggled into it, as James would say, if you don't agree.
Yeah, no, that's right. And you can see here the first book that Ekman wrote, educating for the New World Order. Well, educating for that one way of viewing and being in the world. Educating for sustainability, we might now say, educating for social justice.
Right.
So as the government, and that was written in 1991, so as the government progressively inserted itself into the schools and impinged upon parental prerogatives, preventative psychology and privacy got incorporated into the mix, especially something called predictive behavioral assessment. It sounds very sciencey, doesn't it? And it sounds like the kind of language experts use, and you have a lot of faith and trust in the experts in the school system, and the scope and the number of school counselors has just mushroomed exponentially. But if they say words like predictive behavioral assessment, so many parents think that that is a term of help, support, and care.
Right.
But
And then, of course,
so.
to my ears, it sounds like the Matrix. But
Yeah.
I mean, it's horrific. But I think what's important to remember is that science, and of course, they turn it into a pseudoscience. But as with most things related to this, there are kernels of truth or kernels of reality that they then completely blow out of proportion or they misapply. And yes, you can scientifically study patterns of behavior and probably with a high degree of accuracy predict how people are going to behave. But it does not then follow that that's good. So what happens is we've gotten, you talk about mental healthism, we have a scientism thing going on too,
Yes.
at least in America, possibly in Canada as well, where
Definitely.
people talk about follow the science. Well, that was not the point of follow the science is anti-scientific. That's like unscientific. You wouldn't
Yeah.
say that. You question the science always. That is science. And so what they've done is they've persuaded parents and a lot of lawmakers that if something is scientific or has a scientific basis, it's a net good. It's always good. We should apply it to the children's education and good things will result because, well, hey, we can accurately predict who's going to have trouble in math. Therefore, we should. You're dropping so much context, you're leaving out so many variables that it makes a mockery of science and it becomes that scientism. So I think I just wanted to point that out because I think there are parents out there who say, well, but isn't it true that you can? Yes. What I'd want you to consider, though, listening to us is, does that mean it's good? Does that mean it's helpful? Does that mean it's ethical? And are you forgetting all the other things around how it's being used?
And also to remember, I'm going to be quoting James Lindsay a lot, really, but the truth married to the lie.
Correct.
I think he was talking about that a lot in the recent American Maoism lecture.
Yes.
It's a truth married to a lie, and it doesn't really go in. Thinking like those roll plugs into a wall, and the little bits come out at the side, and they grip on. Well, those bits don't grip on unless there is a little truth.
That's right.
They just slide out again if it was just all lie. So they hook you that way, and there are susceptibilities. We all have susceptibilities to be conned and deceived, and that little bit of truth, you might need to ask yourself why that is appealing. So that's a discussion for another time. But yeah, there needs to be a lot of self-awareness when you're listening to things, listening to what the people are saying in the schools, the teachers and the administration, to be, have one ear kind of asking, really? How? Why? What?
That's right. That's right.
So this profiling and so schools became less about substantive knowledge, cognitive teaching and learning, and much more about profiling and political correctness. And that formed the basis of what would become data mining, which is where, Lisa and yourself and others have just given outstanding presentations. So we're talking 1994, and the advances in computer technology and the aggressive pharmaceutical industry have capitalized on having that data because they can then market based on the results. So, it's a big business. It's a business model. A lot of this deception and pure poison in the education system is actually a business model.
That's correct.
It is evil at root. There are very much certain goals, but we may as well get rich off them while we do it, because wars are one thing, but we may as well get rich off the arms industry. And it's a sort of what do you say, a chemical and intellectual arms industry, if you like.
Yep.
Bit of a horrible way of putting it, but while they're destroying everything, they get rich in the process.
Correct.
Political correctness by means of a personal computer. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so I didn't know about the Texas Medication Algorithm Project, a pilot alliance of individuals from the pharmaceutical industry, the University of Texas, and the mental health and corrections systems of Texas. I'm not going to go on about that, but just look at those, what do they call them now? Partnerships?
Public-private partnerships.
Yeah.
They call it, they've renamed fascism. They call it stakeholder capitalism. So I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to get the word capitalism in to attract people from the right, and have stakeholder in there to attract people from the left. And it's just a fancy new term for fascism. Actual capitalism exists in a free market, which we no longer have, where people take risks and they can fail, and they don't get to have a captive audience of customers corralled into a building or several buildings and forced to pay for products made by a private corporation that then turns around and rewards the public entities that did it with campaign contributions and other things. So this closed loop has nothing to do with capitalism. And the people they call stakeholders are not the students, not the parents, not the people on the receiving end of all of their so-called products, but themselves. They are the stakeholders.
Business model. Yeah.
Correct. So, it's the Matrix.
Yeah, and there's huge public relations boosts they get. Look, it's for the children. It's for the children. Aren't we doing good? Look at our community, and look at our work. That meant that there was then buy-in for psychological profiling. It sounded great. It sounded like it was helping, but it expanded the coercive mental health treatment programs, including the mind-altering drugs, etc. So begin with the school children and the teachers, and then expand to evaluating parents. This has then bring in here Disabilities Education Act. You bring in the funding, and I just put this in here not because I'm an expert in this kind of government aspect of things and the big business, but I just wanted people to see the connections and the relationships between these stakeholders. And this is all mental health, right?
Right.
So, and I think that last sentence really sums it up. For the first time in American history, average citizens worried about being targeted by their own government, not from agents looking down the barrel of a gun, but by behavioral psychologists working the barrel of a computer keyboard.
Correct.
Okay. So how does the state level legislation then become federal and state? And so we've got this, what happens in one place then can be replicated in another place, and then it can go national. That's really that first slide that I put there. Do you want me to read that out, or
sure?
Just leave it? Okay. State level copycat legislation was already in the works, a typical ploy when the federal government badly wants a nationwide initiative. Now, I think that's something to keep in mind with all of the comprehensive sex ed and all of the anti-racism and things like that, Right. What the feds do is apply pressure and or offer financial incentives to state governors, who in turn get help crafting the legislative wording through the Commission on Uniform State Laws. Well, how is SEL being spread and implemented?
That's correct. Grants, ESSER funds. Yep.
Hello,
but you don't get it unless you use CASEL-approved programs.
Yeah. So young people are being assessed early on for individualistic tendencies, oh dear, as part of their psychobehavioral assessments, controversial opinions, unconventional attitudes, and can exclude pupils from career paths that might lead to positions of influence or leadership. So you're being screened.
That's right.
And implementing the kinds of values changes, they can do that then without using the jackboot. Okay, they can manipulate and groom you. This is real grooming, isn't it?
Oh, it
Actually,
absolutely is. Yeah.
yeah. So they can groom you through value change this way. So while the author was compiling the anthology, she came across something called psychopolitics. She spent 15 years chronicling it, psychopolitics. And when I read that, I thought, I've seen that word before. And psychopolitics has assumed a permanent place in daily life, not only in the United States, but throughout the so-called free world. Well, it's certainly in the Five Eyes countries.
That's right.
And so Intimidation 101 for the 21st century. Its purpose, to avoid a military showdown, a civil war, while turning out a population of sitting ducks that thinks with their emotions instead of facts and reason. Well, Deb,
And
I
this
can't tell
avoids
you.
a civil war. How? I don't mean to laugh. I don't mean to laugh, but I'm saying if you want to prevent civil strife, you do not raise up a generation of people who think with their emotions.
Well, I think a certain amount of civil strife is they would consider very beneficial to their cause. If
Sure.
if if we're in the wrecking ball phase,
True.
and then they're not the enemy, are they? The
No.
factions that they've weaponized against each other are the enemies.
Right.
So
Well,
they
not day
can,
one anyway, but after a little while, when they
yeah.
get a little too radical, they'll have to go.
Oh yes, yes. So I like if I had a penny for every time someone on Twitter has said, but why? Why is everyone so emotional? Why are these young kids, coming out of schools? Why can they only react? Why can't they reason with facts? Well, they were groomed not to. That
That's right.
capability was, it's not that it wasn't ever nurtured. That's true, but it was actively destroyed. Their ability to do that, even independently, if we're trying to do it on their own, is seriously
Correct.
compromised
That's
by
right.
how they've been groomed through the process. So we'll go to the next slide. I know because as well, just in my own process of trying to learn all this stuff, I know what, in terms of the philosophy level of it all, there were certain things that I had to overcome, and it was a huge struggle, certain assumptions and things that I'd learned through the conditioning through school. And it's ever so difficult when you don't have the language and the grammar, and you haven't actually had a secure cognitive foundation in your own education, because my
Right.
education was not classical by any means.
Right.
So yeah, it's really difficult. So what do the architects of education believe? They believe man is an animal. He's an animal he's been given a civilized veneer. It's interesting that it's a given, isn't it? So
It is.
it's just one with a civilized veneer. He's been given it, right? Man is a collective animal, collective species being, grouped together for his own protection. Therefore, own protection before the threat of the environment. Those who so group and control him must then have in their possession specialized techniques to direct the vagaries and the energies of the animal man toward greater efficiency in the accomplishment of the goals of the state.
Wow.
So here we go. It's scientism right there. Right
That's
there.
right.
Psychopolitics, the art and science of asserting and maintaining dominion over the thoughts and loyalties of individuals, officers, bureaus, and masses, and the effecting of the conquest of enemy nations through mental healing.
Wow.
And that comes from brainwashing, Beria. I'm not going to go into who Beria is. People can go and look that up.
Yeah,
And
well,
I
Stalin,
want them to.
Stalin's man, show me the man and
Yeah.
I'll show you the crime. Yeah,
Yeah.
he was, wow, a twisted individual. But I notice you have Robert J. Lifton, and I've covered him a little bit on this channel. I've tried to explain to my audience that, first of all, that they need to read this, Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism. But his list perfectly aligns with what we call woke.
Mm.
So with the process of thought reform absolutely perfectly aligns with what is being done right now.
Yes. Okay. Moving on.
Okay. And why this is the little cursor does not want to get to the right place. There we go.
Okay. So I think you can tell by the font that we're still in psychopolitics, that we're still there. So state goals for the individual and the masses. Just as we would discover an individual to be ill, whose organs, each one, had a different goal from the rest, so we discover the individuals and the state to be ill, where goals are not rigorously codified and enforced. Now, the people codifying and enforcing those goals are the teachers with their social justice curriculum right now.
Right.
Yeah. The Freirean, I can't say that word, I can't say his name properly, sorry, but
That's okay.
you know, Paolo.
Yes, Paolo.
Yes, Paolo's pedagogy, the state goals codified and enforced through UN policy. There are those who, in less enlightened times, gave man to believe that goals should be personally sought and held. That's less enlightened, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
And that indeed man's entire impulse toward higher things stemmed from freedom. We must remember that the same peoples who embraced this philosophy also continued in man the myth of spiritual existence. Now, quite some years ago, when I hadn't done a lot of deep dives into theology and philosophy, I would have, you said the word spiritual experience to me, and I would have thought of it in a new agey kind of woo-woo kind of way.
Sure.
Spiritual existence. I see it very differently now. I actually see it much more in terms of metaphysics and ontology. I see it, and I've done a lot of reading around Thomism, the theology of St. Thomas, about what is man, what is the nature of man, how does man come to understand himself. And I'm not going to try and say much of that, because where I'm at in my understanding, I understand a lot more than I did, but that doesn't mean that I can articulate it clearly for an uninformed audience yet. But it's helped me tremendously to see that actually spiritual existence, in terms of traditional theology, is much more aligned with reason and epistemology. And that it basically gets to the heart of what is a man, what is a woman, and the law of non-contradiction and first principles. That is what's really being nullified here. Not some kind of woo-woo idea of spirituality and flying spaghetti monsters, or some kind of infantile new atheist trashing of religion. You know what I mean?
Well, yes, I do. But this, I'm glad you brought this up, because James talks about this quite a lot when he talks about them as being Gnostic, and how their ultimate goal, that what they believe, it would seem, and this goes back to the Theosophists and so forth, is that this spirit, we would think of spirit or your soul or whatever you want to call it as individual. You have one and it's unique. And those people who believe in a God, for example, or follow a religion, tend to agree that is, that they have this unique and individual soul. They are, perfect in every way, that, God doesn't make mistakes, whatever you want to say. And that, that it's for them to, if you want to talk about your spirituality, you are personally trying to be, your best, whatever. The way they talk about it is as if you're trapped. Your body is a trap.
Yeah.
And your soul isn't something that's part of you or that's a gift or anything else. It's trapped in a prison. It actually belongs to the collective. Like, there's this giant universe that you're just a tiny part of, and you aren't unique. You're not, you may have even been traveling around for, millennia, depending on which version of their woo that they believe. But they use spirituality because they know that people who believe in a soul will pick up on that word and say, oh, that's a good thing. That's believing in something higher than yourself, or that, having a metaphysical connection to the universe, whatever. But they don't believe that. They believe that you, the individual, actually are not, and you're just a speck of essence of something, and you're trapped in this body. And that's where a lot of ideas like the gender stuff comes from, is it, just floating around this gendered spirit, and it got trapped inside the wrong body. And that's fundamentally different. That is not the same thing as the spirit of an individual in any
No,
way.
no, that's right. And I hope what we come into in a bit will help clarify that as well. So state goals depend upon loyalty and obedience for their accomplishment. I won't read the rest of this, but a state goal so the interruption of a state goal will be discovered as having been interrupted by a person whose disloyalty and disobedience is the direct result of his own misalignment with life. What is life? Biophiliac? Paolo, what is life? It's not what we've grown up to think of as life. It's the conscientization, the political consciousness. That is life, right? It's the approved mind. And the what we grew up with would be considered death, right? So this is I can't even think of what I want to say, but not nice, this next bit. It is not always necessary to remove the individual. It is possible to remove his self-willed tendencies to the improvement of the goals and gains of the whole. Okay, so we don't necessarily have to drag you away and liquidate you. We can just suck out your soul and turn you into an NPC. And we have a whole education system built out and good to go to do that through our Wundt laboratory, which we'll get to. So the technologies of, you think Harry Potter soul, was it Death Eater or something like that?
Yes, exactly.
It's kind of the dynamic of what it's like sitting in a social justice classroom. The technologies of psychopolitics are graduated upon the scale which starts somewhat above the removal of the individual themselves, upward toward the removal only of those tendencies which bring about his lack of cooperation. See, the science is so good that we can remove the bad bits from them that we don't want, that don't align with our goals, but we can leave the rest there. So, they kind of look like a walking, talking, functioning person,
right?
But that which will interfere with our plans has been removed. And you know what, Deb? And I'm going to sound terribly rude now. And I want not all Canadians. Let me just say this before I get shot. When I moved here and I had started to make some acquaintances and connections in the education community, because I came here and I didn't know anybody.
Sure.
And then I ended up a couple of years later working at the university. And when I was in meetings or speaking with people, it's exactly that. I come home and say to my husband, it's like being in the Stepford Wives.
Isn't it strange?
I can hear they're saying words, but they're not making any sense to me whatsoever. It's like someone's just pulled out that string from the back of a doll, and out trots this NPC phrase with absolutely no relevance at all to the situation that's going on in reality.
Yes.
I thought, where the hell have I landed? I am not in Kansas now. It was incredible. It was such a culture shock, and I wasn't prepared for that at all.
Yep. I recently attended a conference that was led by people like that, and I struggled mightily to make any sense of what they were saying. And after 3 days, I actually asked. They asked for feedback. What do you, what's missing from this conference? What did you think there was, what did you get out of it? And I said, I have to confess, I'm coming away from this having heard a lot of things and said a lot of things and read a lot of things, but I can't help but wonder, what was the point? Yeah. And they sort of looked at me like, what? And I said, well, what was the point? And they said, well, we intentionally decided not to have a point. Meaning, that we weren't here to try to brainstorm solutions or or really come to any conclusions whatsoever. We were just examining different narratives. And I thought to myself, what a colossal waste of time. In other words, you really have to be quite dense to be walking around not realizing that different people have different perspectives of the same situation. I mean, especially at our age, maybe children. But to just sit for 3 days and talk about other people think differently. Yes, other people think differently. Well, what do they think? Well, they think this. Yes, I knew all this. And especially given the topic we were talking about, is that yes, and we know these things. Water is wet. I just didn't understand the point. And they seem to derive so much self-satisfaction stating the obvious over and over and
Yeah.
over, as if, listen to how smart we are. We see things. And again, they weren't seeing facts or reality. They were talking about narratives. They were recognizing emotions. They were saying, we hear this, we see this emotion, this person's reaction, this side of the argument. There was no point to it other than to say, look how well we can observe emotions.
Yes. You've put
Total
me in
waste of
mind.
time.
Yeah, but it's a real virtue to them, isn't it?
It is. Yes.
I think they might get slightly high on it too. I'm being rude,
It
sorry.
seems so. They definitely seem to
Yeah.
get a real thrill out of it.
I've just pulled up something I posted. I post Donald DeMarco a lot, The Darkening of the Intellect. And let me just read you a little bit because I can't remember if I added it in this presentation or not. So, almost every student entering university believes or say that they believe that truth is relative. The students, they do have values, but the light by which they grasp them appears so faint that it does not provide these young relativists with the conviction that such values are more real than their opposites. Consequently, they withdraw from judging certain things to be true or good and others to be false or evil. This twilight mentality, and that's what I'd stepped into, I think, here and what you're describing, this twilight mentality, however, has not proven to be particularly disconcerting. In fact, it is usually taken to indicate the presence of a virtue, that of open-mindedness. I'm so open-minded. Professor Bloom would have relativists abandon their world of shadows and come out into the light, where the distinction between truth and falsity, good and evil, becomes sharp. But relativists try to justify that their opposition to making such sharp distinctions is in the interest of preserving their attitude of equality towards everyone and everything. Rather than judge what is good, they prefer to judge that it is good not to judge. That's
Yeah.
absolutely the NPC
Brilliant.
thing that I met here. Nonetheless, the ideological world of equality, tolerance, and open-mindedness, thereby constructed, is precisely that, an ideological construction, having no foundation in reality and offering no practical guidelines by which people can conduct their lives. Your conference offered no practical guidelines by which people could go about their business, right?
Correct.
Yeah, skeptics, very much like relativists, find virtue in their unenlightened state. As a result of being doubtful about everything, the skeptic is never able to secure enough reality ever to offend anyone. Therefore, in presuming himself free from any dogma, he prides himself in being broad-minded and above discrimination. It's a self-image thing. It's
Right.
again, it's the affect. It's how am I appearing? What's my social currency? This self.
But it's not a healthy self.
Oh no, no.
It's a very insecure self. It's a self that derives all of its I mean, every bit of feedback about it comes from the outside world. It has no way internally to feel okay in the world. And
Haven't you haven't you just described narcissism there?
oh, of course.
Yeah.
And that's what we're cultivating, is we're cultivating it. And people talk about I think Chris Rufo just came out with a little film about the cluster B, personalities and that are just running rampant. And Well, again, I'm not a psychotherapist, I'm not a psychologist. But I have, looked into some of these things, and I'm starting to agree with those who say that narcissism is a personality trait rather than a disorder. And the reason I say that is that disorders can be treated. Not always well. I'm not saying it's easy, but they can be treated. Even borderline personality disorder can be treated, as can OCD, as can most of the personality disorders. There are treatments if the person seeks treatment, and they can be self-aware of what's going on and so forth. There are narcissists who are politicians and celebrities, and they're very effective in their lives. You might not want to be married to one of them or have a close, intimate relationship with one of them, but we wouldn't necessarily call them mentally ill, right? We would just call them unpleasant. We wouldn't want to be in relationships with them. But what I'm seeing is the personality trait be rewarded and developed and enhanced and nurtured, because it's natural in all of us to be a little bit narcissistic about some things, right? And certainly children are inherently narcissistic because it's a survival skill. They focus on themselves, and they also don't necessarily have the ability to conceptualize that other people are other people for quite a while. Yeah. If you get them stuck there, or if you nurture that kind of juvenile narcissism to the point where they never break out of it, they don't evolve in their cognitive development, their emotional development to be mature, they'll be stuck there. And then if you surround them with people who are personality disordered for real, you'll have this comorbidity. You'll have this thing where the person is high on the narcissism personality trait scale because they've never matured, and their borderline tendencies, and they have, these other tendencies. And that combination is absolutely toxic. And that's what I'm seeing. And, we are absolutely cultivating that. What I've observed, again, in my, just layperson's way, is that we are getting children stuck at a level of emotional development that results in that.
Yeah, we are. Absolutely. We are arrested development is the term I was looking for. Yes.
And we're calling it virtue.
And we're calling it care.
Yes.
Yes. I must go quicker through these. I see every one of these things could be a riff for ages, but
right.
I just wanted to draw attention to the Constitution of Man as a political organism, because it links very much to Mao's quote about, I can't remember it correctly. Can you? Not to have a political consciousness is akin to not having a soul. I think it was something like that.
Yeah.
That came from
Well,
Mao.
this is right up there with the Freirean idea of, teaching as a political act, this notion that everything we do, we live and breathe politics, and that's why education is a liberatory practice. It is a fundamentally different point of view and philosophy of education than everybody had before.
Yes, and look at where it's coming from. Man is already a colonial aggregation of cells, and to consider him an individual would be an error. Now this, again, I've read tons and tons of esoteric stuff in my 20s and 30s. In the end, threw it all in the bin. But I got very interested for a while in all the teachings of Gurdjieff, fourth way stuff. And there's the lie marriage the truth very much with this, because we all have competing and discordant aspects of ourselves within us, and we're not necessarily aware of when we're inhabiting one or another of those, or we can be quite a committee of annoying people within us, if you know what I mean. We can be at war, and we can be quite discordant and all the rest of it. But this is saying that there is no individual, there is no individuality, there is no individual soul. And that's the lie. So man's already just an aggregation of cells. Colonies of cells have gathered together as one organ or another of the body. So, colonies of cells, and then you think of gestation, and one becomes a spleen, another becomes a heart, another, etc. And then these organs have themselves gathered together to form a whole. You can see where this is going. Whole-ons and whole-ons. If you know your Barbara Marx Hubbard crap, whole-ons and the this idea of parts within a whole, and etc. Thus, we see that man himself is already a political organism. Oh, we didn't know that. Even if we do not consider a mass of men. So they're already having that notion there.
Right.
Okay.
And they don't they're not consistent, because the very same people who will say all of these things will turn around and tell you that this, the person who does not feel right in the body they were born with, is whatever they say they are as an individual, and we have to respect whatever their individual notion is. And the James would call this the iron law of, of woke contradiction. They'll say these things, and then they'll turn around and they'll go in and out of parts of reality, which is why, as you said, it's always attached, the sort of the lie is married to the truth. They don't want to accept reality as it is. They want to create that pseudo reality, but they're not completely abandoning it to total fantasy. And that's why the contradictions abound. But I hear from so many people, but they also say this: they surely believe in individuals because of they're clamoring for these kinds of individual rights. And then, I try to get them back to, reality, and say, what is that really a right, though? To force other people to, accept whatever delusion you are laboring under, or whatever fantasy world you want to live in, and to force other people to live there too, has nothing to do with rights, and it has absolutely nothing to do with you as an individual person.
No, well, speaking of fantasy and fiction, so you can see on the bottom bit there, thus did psychopolitics morph from its incarnation among science fiction aficionados, H.G. Wells, etc., into a tool that allows attitudes to be assessed, predicted, tracked, monitored, and possibly modified from childhood on, all via computer.
That's right.
Okay, so I must move quicker for you. Sorry.
It's all right.
So the battle for freedom of speech in America, I would say the Western world really, will be lost, not when freedom of speech is finally taken away, but when Americans, Westerners, become so adjusted or conditioned to getting along with the group that when they see a threat, they say, but I can't afford to be controversial. And that's what I've seen hugely amongst colleagues and, increasingly at large. That's been happening for such a long time now.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. So pragmatism, so that the fallout is that pragmatism and expediency necessarily become substitutes for independent thought. Nobody stands up. Everyone protects their own little kingdom and their own necessities, their own lifestyle, etc.
Well, and they punish people who do. And they punish people who do.
Yeah. Okay. Pragmatism and expediency are two words I tweet out a lot, actually. Yeah. Okay, next slide. Okay, so predictive behavioral technology, it cut its teeth in the nation's schools, using the questionnaires passed off as being personalized. And I know you've talked about that a lot with your guests. It's interesting that they can test for things like gullibility, but personality profiling and things has been a tool in HR for a long time, right? So they can.
Absolutely.
They've been screening people for a long time. So over 50 years ago, people spoke in terms of laws, constitutional rights, and morality. Today's courts are enmeshed in the kinds of technicalities that depend upon what the definition of is.
Yep.
Yeah. And this is where to do with the manipulation of language, I found Just Milo, The Rape of the Mind, to be invaluable. It's fantastic. I urge people to get a copy of that. So I'll read a little bit. If we are to learn to protect our mental integrity on all levels, we must examine not only those aspects of contemporary culture which have to do directly with the struggle for power, but also those developments in our culture which, by dulling the edge of our mental awareness, or by taking advantage of our suggestibility, can lead us into the mental death or boredom of totalitarianism. So we're looking at cultural things, we're looking at media, we're looking at the how classroom pedagogy has changed. We're looking at our print and our screen media, we're looking at radio, all of these cultural influences that they just lull us to sleep all the time. I mean, I haven't had television in the house for a long time. I can access films, the kids can access films, but I won't have TV channels with advertising, and I haven't had radio. And it came on in my husband's car. The radio came on recently, and I had to turn it off. I was just going to scream because it's the advertising, and it's just you can feel your brain just going to mush
I won't
with it
watch
on.
it either. I watch streaming.
Yeah,
I mean, in other words, I watch
yeah,
movies and the kind of shows that have no commercials, but I will not. I haven't watched the news in years.
correct.
I
Yeah,
don't
I
listen to
haven't.
anything with commercials. It is mind
Yeah,
numbing.
yeah,
And that's exactly what it is, mind numbing. That's the whole point of it.
yeah. So you become wholly passive to this environment, and you never ever. You can't actually think. You can't mentally function in that environment.
No.
All it does is shut you down. So when kids and parents and teachers, when they're in that kind of environment all the time, and you ask them to think critically about some of these things, I don't mean, critically as in Paulo Freire. I mean, think about what they're being told and try to understand it. Is that right? Is that true? But just the ability even to do that, sometimes they look at you as if you're crazy. Like,
Yeah.
why? But I've been told it. I mean, and even teachers. Well, I learned it on professional development. Why do I need to know any more than that? It's been told to me, and now I repeat it. That's how it
The
is.
hardest question I get, and it hurts the most when it comes from one of my children, even though I've done my level best, I homeschooled them for a bunch of time, and they live with me, so they hear me talk about things.
Yeah.
They're still not immune to everything going on around them, and the worst question I get is, "Mom, but why do you care? But what's the big deal? Why don't just ignore it? Why is this so important? Why do you care?" So even though they'll look at it and they'll say, "Yeah, that's stupid," or "I don't agree with that," or "That doesn't make sense," they don't understand. They've still, the amount of school they went to, they aren't able to form the connections to help them
Mm.
understand why I care, why it matters to them. And they don't even realize that it matters to them. They think it's something that they can either agree with or disagree with and then move on, and don't realize the importance that the prevailing worldview or whatever, of your
Mm.
government, of your fellow citizens, of your friends, etc., how that will affect them. And it's so hard to explain when the education they've had and the time they were in public school just prevented that. It prevented them thinking that way. So I have to start from scratch. And a lot of parents are facing that right now too. They want to fight for their kids, but they're facing pushback from their own kids. They're facing their children. If their children are older than, 10,
Yeah.
"Mom, you're embarrassing me. Stop going to the school board meeting," or whatever. I mean, there are some kids who are very proud of their parents, but it's rare. It's very rare. Most of them want to just dig a hole and crawl inside.
I've been there. I can, yeah, and it's really been tough.
Yep.
And that we've been through times of, talking. I was used to debrief them from school, but I was careful as I could be not to be that crazy mom.
Yeah.
And also, I'm very mindful of the fact that their their friends and their friends' parents are fully members of the Church of Social Justice. And
Exactly.
so for them, having a foot in both worlds is really difficult. Like the dissonance, it's very difficult. Um, and their reality is that, socially speaking, they love their friends dearly and they're trying to get on. And and I don't want to be the cause of them having any disharmony with their friends or anything like that. I can't. I haven't had any success reaching um, the parents in terms of, I've sown a few seeds, but it's so far gone, Deb. It's so far gone, and certainly in the community where I am. Um, it's just I'm very well aware, put it this way, of the burden that's on my kids' shoulders because they know what I've been researching. They know where I come from, where I'm coming from,
Right.
and yet they're in this world that has been conscientized.
Right.
They're already over the rainbow.
Yeah.
It's done. They're
It's
in Munchkin. They're in Munchkin land, and operating in that world but not being of it is a level of maturity that I have big guilt about putting on my kids' shoulders.
exactly. There are times you think, if would it have been easier, but then I can't do that to myself. I'm glad to be where I am and thinking the way I think. I would not want to be comfortably numb, so to speak.
Yeah.
Even as hard as it is, even though basically unemployable, or it's very,
Oh,
very hard.
I'm
Yeah.
unemployable. No one will have me
And
now, so yeah.
exactly. And I still would not rather be that. I'm still glad to be able to just walk outside and perceive reality and read and think and believe what I want to believe and not be at the mercy of others in any way, of the
Mm.
opinions of others. And there are people walking around right now who absolutely despise me and call me terrible names, but it just doesn't bother me. And the only reason it doesn't bother me is that I have the ability to think that way. I wouldn't. I'm glad that my children at least have the foundation for that. They might not get to it, right away, but the foundation is there if they want it. Whereas so many
Mm.
kids won't even have that.
No, well, and as well, when there are pockets in Canada, there are some areas where the younger generation, I mean, maybe 16, 17, 18, they have awakened to what's happening, and they at least have some fellowship, some community. I think that's what's lacking, certainly where we are.
Sure.
Um, that it's if there are a few kids who are a similar mind, then at least, when there's a lot of woke stuff happening around them, they can at least look at each other and kind of go, "Oh, I see you, buddy." You
Right.
know, Even if they don't say anything, they go, "I see you. I'm here, you're
Exactly.
here, we're here. It's okay." But when you haven't got that, what do? You can't. It's just intolerable. You talk about the thought reform and the ostracization and the terrible psychological burden of that. It's
Right.
awful for kids. But I remember one of my younger daughters a year or so ago, and I was really, really heavily getting into the research, and she heard me talking to my older one about it, and she said, "Oh, Mom, but you're thinking that and you're saying that, but school says this and that. So, school, where do you get your information from, Mum?" And I said, "Well, I've been reading this, and I knew this from the past, and I learned this, and I'm now reading this." And she said, "Well, that's just reading. That's how come that the reading you're doing is any better or different to the reading that the teachers are doing in school? It's all just reading and learning." She was basically saying it's all relative,
That's right. What
right?
makes your reading better than my reading? Because
Yeah.
there's no limiting principle, and
Yes.
there's no limiting concept. They don't comprehend that reality is, and that
That's right.
reality always wins.
Yeah.
If there there is truth.
But if you've come from kindergarten and the only
Yes,
thing that you've had in your learning journey in school is to be asked about your feelings and your imagination and to create, to imagine, and then express that. You've
yep,
never actually been asked to recognize
that's right.
reality and learn the fundamental um, grammar and vocab of reality and
Yep,
how to knit that together and to express that and what the
that's right.
comprehension of that actually means. So you're
Right.
just living in fantasy the whole time. And then, of course, you want to project it because that's all you
That's
know.
right. That's right. And it is quite terrifying to think of the world that such people will inhabit because they can't create anything real.
That's
They
that's
can't
right.
build anything. They can't. For all the imagination, they don't know how things actually work. And so what will happen is they will become dependent, if they aren't already, on an increasingly tiny group of elite people who actually know things,
Mm-hmm.
who can leverage that knowledge over them. And we're right back in medieval times. I mean, we're right back in the dark ages where only a tiny subset of people had anything resembling knowledge. And it was a very specific, narrow kind of knowledge. So, you know, it's quite frightening to think of what that will produce. And what gives me hope is, first of all, people like you and people like Lisa and people who are, like James, who are out there doing this work, but also the fact that there always have been and there always will be what I call a remnant. People who simply refuse to submit, they refuse to succumb, they refuse to go along, they refuse to comply. And the irony of the technological age is things can, as fast as things go south, they can turn right again very quickly, which is why we do what we do. We wouldn't be sitting here having these conversations if we didn't have hope, if we didn't believe that we could reach a critical mass of people who would just turn things around. I believe I saw something today in Canada that people were taking to the streets to
Yeah.
protest something. I don't know exactly what, but just like
The million-person march for protesting against the curriculum and the social justice curriculum in the schools, and in particular, schools having privacy and keeping information from parents.
right. And so, if they can pick that up, if that can gain some momentum, and maybe it will, maybe it won't, but the point is things can turn around fairly quickly if we just stand up and say no. Because I do also believe that there are more people, in terms of just numbers, there are more people who at a minimum think this is cuckoo. In other words, they may not understand why they think it's not right, but they
Yeah.
certainly don't like it. And there are more of them than the people speaking the word salad that you heard, and the Stepford people, the
Yeah.
zombies. They're concentrated in coastal cities in the United States. They're concentrated in certain in a certain socioeconomic class. There still are smaller in numbers. It just so happens that the mainstream, in terms of, they've captured the institutions, they've captured higher education, they've captured K-12 education, they've captured the media, they've captured entertainment, they've captured the managerial class in our government. So it seems all encompassing, like you can't escape or you're all alone, but it's not true.
No. Well, if we go on, I keep saying we'll move quicker, and then I'm sorry.
Well, we should probably decide
Sorry.
how far we want to go, because we're almost to 2 hours, and I just want to make sure that we respect your time and the audience
And
as
your
well.
time.
So
And
yeah.
well, I'll speed up a bit. Okay. So just what I'll pick out of this one is that all things that used to develop character are suddenly politically incorrect. So why is mental health falling apart? Well, of course, like the medical model, the Rockefeller medical model, if you can create the symptoms and then come along with the cure, so-called, all power to the business model. So take out the things that used to develop character and keep mental health flourishing, call them politically incorrect. We'll go on to the next one. We're okay to do the next one, Deb?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I already
Okay,
clicked it.
we're good now. So, psychopolitical operatives should at all times be alert to the opportunity to organize for the betterment of the community. So that's their marketing there. So everything that they sell you, you'll think it's something for your benefit.
But
So
yes, and it's never you. It's always
yeah,
someone else.
yeah. So for the betterment of the community, they'll organize mental health clubs or groups, by thus inviting the cooperation of the population as a whole in mental health programs. Yeah. So the terrors of mental aberration can be disseminated throughout the populace. So political, psychological warfare can be conducted upon domestic populations by those lovely, nice people coming and delivering mental health clubs or groups. Are those lovely, nice people themselves, the ones actually public facing, are they evil people? No, but they're usually, most often people who have unquestioningly taken on board a syllabus, a program. They've not questioned anything about it. They perhaps haven't read at the deeper levels how those programs were formed. They've taken it totally on trust. And then they're repeating it. Yeah.
I would also argue a sizable percentage of them are mentally ill themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
They have a need, whether you might call it a savior complex, some kind of a projection, where they're projecting something that they experienced onto these children. They're, I think what we've done is we've made society safe for people, and in particular society, the society of children, safe, welcoming, and even encouraging to people who would exploit children for their own psychological, economic, and political purposes. And I see that so clearly in some of the people who are organizing these clubs and these groups and so on, that the things they say about parents, for example, indicate to me that they have some unresolved issues with their own parents. And again, I'm not a therapist. It just seems rather obvious to me the way they generalize their uniformly negative view of people they've never met in many cases, the way they talk about children, the way they talk about themselves. There's something else going on. It's not just I've bought this hook, line, and sinker without questioning. While I do believe that is true of many of them, I think there's a subset, and it's a disturbingly large subset, of people who are seeking the company of children to work out something within themselves.
Wounded healer catharsis.
Correct.
And also a little bit of playing to the crowd and a lot of gratification in getting the affirmation.
Borderline.
And then, from the children, which, yes, terrible. So furthermore, each one of these mental health groups, properly guided, can bring at last legislative pressure against the government to secure adequately the position of the psychopolitical operative and to obtain for him government grants and facilities. So the psychopolitical operative, it sounds like something really James Bondish, doesn't it? But that could be your professor, who's, so anyone in that kind of teaching and bureaucratic and academic field, they are operating politically.
Right.
So thus bringing a government to finance its own downfall. And here we've got, I'm thinking about the recent attacks on Mums for Liberty and things. So anyone running afoul of so-called conventional wisdom is relegated to the fringes of debate, hence terms fringe group and lunatic fringe. And I've added far right, which is getting slurred around on all sorts of just normal people, normal groups,
Right.
So we'll move on. I hope people are getting the idea here that, these mental health groups and mental health interventions have a pragmatic, instrumental purpose. It's not for the care of the children.
No.
It's not for the care of teachers. It's for the vested gains and interests of those who would benefit financially and via control. Okay.
That's right.
So we've gone to Wundt. So a psychologist, one of the initial first education theorists of modern education, at least, from Leipzig. His main thesis was the philosophical basis for the principles of conditioning, later developed by Pavlov's dogs, who studied in Leipzig 5 years after Wundt had started his laboratory there. Behavioral psychologists Watson and Skinner, for lobotomy fame and electroconvulsive therapy came out of that stable as well. And this whole psychological behaviorist work took the schools it oriented them more towards socialization of the child and away from development of the intellect.
Right.
And it was working purposefully for the emergence of a society more devoted to the gratification of sensory desires at the expense of responsibility and achievement. Okay, so we can see there the nascent kind of the seeds of the social chaos that would bear fruit later down the line, but also the kindling of an appetite of consumerism. Now, where I've gone most recently is what I'm researching is the impact of Edward Bernays. I won't say too much about that now, but in that sense of self and consuming of the self and what is gratifying. And this is why social justice is so gratifying. It's communism, but it feels like being at a feast, because you're in conforming politically and socially, you're actually consuming yourself as you present it to others for social validation. I'm not going to say much more than that at the moment, but you can see here the devoted to the gratification of sensory desires. So you think about what would come with the sexual revolution and then, mass consumerism and stuff like that. But people were being already primed through the education system to go this direction.
Right.
Or at least their susceptibilities were being kindled, and their ability to resist it was being dismantled. Right. So I've got there the contrast between the kind of that little sign of Adam, and got there the notion and the ontology of man necessary for liberty, property, the American Constitution, and then the opposite, the liberatory education, the liberation theology, and how traditional notions of freedom, traditional liberty has been inverted as a new, quotes, freedom. That freedom of the fist, that freedom of our common goals, the sustainable development goals there, and the new kind of freedom of being happy and owning nothing.
Yes.
So,
and eating bugs.
Yeah, that's right. So it's interesting here thinking about all the work that James has done on Gnosticism, which I knew about Alice Bailey years ago, and it was very brave of him to go. I think it was brave of him to go down that road because it absolutely needed to happen, and I think he's done it so skillfully. Because he's linked it so much to how it's corroded reason and how it's taken the intellect out. I'm full of admiration for the way he's tackled that. So what we've got, so we've got the cult of Dionysus, tune in, drop out, that kind of attitude. So we don't want classical education. We just want social engineering thrust on the children through psychological programming. And that is really the purpose of what we term education. And it has been the purpose for quite a long time.
Yes.
So, and why and how was it made so easy? Well, during the First World War, the father figures of the families of Germany, Britain, and Europe were wiped out. The women were in control of, not control, but they were the caregivers for the children, and that meant giving control to the expanding social state to mold the minds of their offspring. And then I'm thinking post-World War II, Woodrow Wilson, and all of the building out of the social welfare state as well. Yeah. So, the war brings the necessary trauma for these schemes of social welfare that they then bring after that. They never let a good trauma go to waste, right?
Nope.
Like COVID, etc. And what are they bringing now post-COVID? Trauma-informed education.
Right.
All of that.
Well, everyone's traumatized. Apparently, you're just pretty soon it will be axiomatic that having parents is traumatic. That having any parents at all.
I think we're actually there. I've read quite a lot of things where it's actually there. It's all out there now. They have said that. So
it's presumed that all parents are abusive and oppressive.
Yeah, Philip Larkin, hey? It's the new
Exactly.
Your parents F you up. They do, yeah. Okay, we'll go on. Okay, so what Wundt did as the high priest of psychological programming of children, he was able to program the programmers because one of his students, Stanley Hall, then went to America and became John Dewey's mentor. Now your audience
that
probably know about John Dewey.
explains so much. I've tried telling people that John Dewey was not this great hero that people make him out to be.
No.
And yes, he was quite horrible. And people resist. What? Dewey Decimal said Don Dewey. Oh no. And I'm like, no, monster.
Actually, can you just go back to the previous one? I forgot to read something about Wilhelm Wundt.
Sure.
Which is so important for people to see this lineage. Wundt asserted that man is devoid of spirit and self-determinism. That's right. Hello, you've just crapped all over the Constitution there. So go to the next one. Wundt, Hall, Dewey. It all goes down.
That's right.
So education consists either in the ability to use one's powers in a social direction, or else in the ability to share in the experiences of others, and thus widen the individual consciousness to that of the race. Global consciousness. We're a global citizen, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we're a collective. The ultimate problem of all education is to coordinate the psychological and social factors. Hello, Sal. The coordination demands the child be capable of expressing himself, but in such a way as to realize social ends. So here's the self-expression, self-esteem, all of this stuff which became the focus, I would say, in the 1980s, when, certainly from the UK perspective, when the national curriculum changed from O-level to GCSE, and self came in as the focus of learning goals.
That's right.
Because you take out the functional literacy and the functional grammar, so you just express yourself any which way using your own imagination, thoughts, and, well, thought doesn't really mean thoughts, so does it? Because you don't have any grammar to think with. You can't actually think, you react. You imagine, you create in your own mind. But what are you using? If you haven't been taught any functional vocab and grammar, you're using the imagery that you have ingested from your TV, maybe from your talks with your parents, and things that you might have been lucky enough to go out and see and do, but not everyone has that. So it might just be from the TV. It might just be from the music you listen to. It might, all of these impressions are coming into you and will come out in the way that you express yourself if you haven't been equipped with foundational literacy and foundational means of expression.
Exactly.
And the child capable of expressing himself, so I express myself, I put my whole self into the work, but now, as we're seeing, the mask is completely ripped off, but you're only allowed to do that in your role as either the oppressed or the oppressor.
Right.
That's the only way you can express yourself now. Right?
That's right. And if you try to opt out of either of those roles, it's like a kind of heresy. You're cast out. It's really quite scary, and I don't know how far this is going to go, but I do know that it's another one of those contradictions where they'll say, the self-esteem, self-expression, self this, self that, and then, but we're all part of the collective. You have no right to your own, choice of a destiny, choice of a career, choice of even your partner, romantic partner, because if you choose one that offends somebody else, then apparently you're a bigot. So it's really, like I said, the contradictions can make your brain hurt, but the one thread that binds it all together is that the individual cannot, as you just pointed out, express him or herself truly as an individual because they lack the vocabulary and those foundational skills. They can only repeat, they can only parrot.
That's right. And so we're going to use this ruse of self-expression, self-esteem.
Correct.
And we're going to say we cannot give you, we will not give you the means and the building blocks and the tools with which to actually learn and comprehend from what's come before. Year zero, you will not be able to access that. And here's why it's a good thing, because it will hurt your self-esteem. Because
right. God forbid you should accept the reality of how not special you are, right? So I think it's really important for the audience to understand this lineage, as you mentioned before. And so what I'm going to ask is, can we do this as a part 1 and have you come back and do part 2? Because there's so much more content and I want people to be able to digest this. So we have this, everything we've built up to this point. And then if you can come back and we'll do a part 2, and the audience can hear the rest about what happened next. How would that be?
For sure. I think that's a really, really good way of continuing. And just so we've got to this place now where we've let everyone know what the role of affective learning has done in making children focused on the self. And it took away the ability and even the option of learning fundamental grammar, vocabulary, functional literacy, and comprehension of rich bodies of knowledge and methods of learning of what had come before, the Maoist year zero.
Right.
And there were all sorts of ruses to do with, what would you call it? The traditional learning is not engaging, it's not fun, it's not this, that, and the other, and we know that's just rubbish. But those were the ruses put in there. And so this privileging of self-expression and self, we can see now, they express themselves in such a way as to realize social ends. So we can see already Paulo Freire on the horizon, right? We can see
Right.
critical consciousness. We can see Marcuse being coming into view through
Right.
this means of affective learning and this focus on self.
And we can see the roots, of what you started with, which is this mental healthism. So
Mm.
they've they're capitalizing on a problem they created.
Yes.
I think we'll explain exactly how that came into being in part 2 of this broadcast. So this is just so fascinating to me. I mean, I'm the interviewer and I'm sitting here like eating this up. So I hope the audience is also appreciating this amazing work that you've done. And I really look forward to continuing, because this is, folks, this is so important for you to understand. And I do understand it's dense. I'm asking you all the time to listen to James, and this is in the same, I would say, in the same category of research. But it really is important if you want to understand the how and the why, as well as what you might do to fight it. You have to understand the problem and its origin. So, Christine, I cannot thank you enough for joining me for this session, and we will pick up with part 2 another time.
Thank you very much, Deb. Look forward to it.
Yes.
Thank you for
I
having
look
me.
forward to it. Thank you so much.